Welcome to Behind the Neon Lights, Understanding Personal Injury Law in Las Vegas and Beyond.
Hello and welcome to Behind the Neon Lights, Understanding Personal Injury Law in Las Vegas and Beyond with C. Jared Clark, owner and founder of Clark Law Group. They specialize in auto collisions, motorcycle crashes, workplace accidents, and personal injury law, and they are dedicated to helping clients every step of the way. My name is Kevin Rosenquist. I am your host, and today's episode is From the Scene of the Accident, Medical Needs, Legal Rights, and What to Do First. Jared, welcome. Good to see you.
Good afternoon. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to have you here. So let's start here. Take me to the scene of an accident. What do you find is the mindset of someone who has just been injured in a car accident there in Nevada? And what are the first steps they should take immediately?
So taking you to the scene of the accident, it varies from person to person, but there's a common denominator, usually in all victims when they're involved in an auto accident. And that's under the inducement of stress. Mm-hmm. Right after the accident happens, usually your adrenaline is rushing. You're having a panic attack, depending on how bad it gets. You're not exactly sure what to do. And oftentimes it's people's first time, even sometime when it's their second time, they forgot the first time because they were under that constant state of stress and adrenaline. So it can be scary for a lot of people, and that interferes with your judgment in terms of you're not really thinking about preserving evidence or facts to make sure and hold that party responsible later on.
What should someone do immediately, assuming obviously that they're not, severely injured and need to go to the hospital? But what are the first steps that you tell people they should do?
Well, I always tell clients and prospective clients, the first two things you should always do is one, make sure any passengers in your vehicle are okay. Mm-hmm. Number two, make sure that depending on where the accident happened at, you are not in harm's way of getting hit again. So if you need to pull over to the side of the road or whatever it may be, but if you're in the middle of the freeway, you're probably going to want to try to get out the freeway, the middle of the freeway, get over to the emergency lane. Once you have assessed those two situations, now is the documentation gathering or evidence gathering. You want to make sure that you get pictures of the scene. You get pictures of the damages to your vehicle as well as the vehicle that struck you. A more nuanced one that people rarely get, and I understand why, but a picture of the VIN number can help save a case more often than not. That's in the front left corner of the driver's side window shield. So I would make sure and get the photograph of the VIN number as well. If there was any witnesses that captured or, had the chance to observe the incident, you're going to want to speak to them. Now, in practice, that could be a little different. What I realized here, especially in America, is everybody is in a rush.
Yeah.
So even when, people who have witnessed the accident, oftentimes they go about their way. You don't have the opportunity to speak to them, gather any information or contact information to reach out to them later to get their side of the story. So that's one that in practice that doesn't always work out. But if anybody at the scene or near the scene, try to speak to them to see exactly what happened.
How important is it to document the scene of an accident right away?
It is very important. The insurance companies are actually banking that you don't document the scene right away, because when there's things like gaps in treatment or, no documentation of what happened, that's going to create challenges for you and your bodily injury claim and property damage claim later on, when these things need to be produced. So the insurance companies, this is what they bank on. This is something that, they're hoping you don't do. They are not on your side, as we all know, but sometimes that gets misconstrued. So, the better off that you are at documenting exactly what happened, that's going to help your lawyer. But number two, that is also going to help provide the information to substantiate your claims, your injuries, as well as your property damage claim.
I don't know, man. I've seen commercials and they actually say we are on your side, some of them. So
yeah, just because, I tell my sister this all the time, just because you say it doesn't make it true.
That's true. That's true, right? Yeah. I totally understand that. So obviously, if you're injured at the scene of a car crash, you want to call 911 and you want to get help. You need to get the help that to get you right. How can someone ensure their medical needs are addressed while also protecting legal rights? It's kind of a tricky situation.
It's a very tricky situation. And, I'm sure it varies from state to state and even just law enforcement agency to law enforcement agency. So you make a good point. After you did all that, obtain the evidence, the information, you always want to call 911 to have law enforcement come and conduct independent investigation to find out exactly what happened, who was at fault, and they could go ahead and issue a citation accordingly. That is also obviously going to help you later on with your injury claim and your property claim when it's time for the adjuster to do what they do. And that's adjust a claim, conduct an investigation, and make a decision. I could tell you here in Las Vegas, in particular in Clark County, really, policies have changed with law enforcement where sometimes they come to the scene of the accident and sometimes they don't. I'm not sure across the nation how big of an issue that is in other places, but I can tell you here in Las Vegas, that's a huge issue. Oftentimes, and it's it's became public knowledge or common knowledge that people know that. So sometimes they won't even bother calling the law enforcement or 911. And, I want to say always contact them when they ask, are you hurt? You could simply say something to the effect where, I was just in an accident. My adrenaline is up. I would like for you guys to come to the scene. But they have kind of this official, unofficial policy where if you're not hurt, they will not come and conduct an investigation. Well, what's a little problematic in that is you don't always know that you're hurt immediately. One, for the reason that I mentioned with the stress and the adrenaline and your body undergoing this chemical transformation. The other reason, is typically you experience a soreness depending on how bad the accident is. But, it's like lifting weights, right? Right when you leave the gym, you're not hurt immediately. But I can tell you in that 48, 72 hour mark, you're going to be feeling some soreness and some pain. And that's, it's kind of a good analogy to draw home that, 2, 3, 4 days after the accident is perfectly normal for injuries to start to surface.
Yeah. Or even, playing sports, like how many times I've been hurt and don't even realize that I'm hurt because in the moment in the game, your blood's flowing, your adrenaline's going, you're trying to win, you're trying to do stuff. And all of a sudden, like you do something, you're like, oh, I'm fine. And then all of a sudden the next day you're like, oh man, I'm not fine. That hurts like really badly.
Same exact concept.
Yeah.
In sports, at least football, they're going to come and give you an injection and tell you to get back on the field.
Oh yeah, just get some cortisone. You'll be fine.
You'll be okay. You don't have that option there, at the scene. So that's incredibly important. Coupled with that, you're going to want to call, the ambulance, right? Make sure that they come and check you out. Whether or not you get transported is another issue, right? After they have a chance to check you out, check your vitals, assess the scene, they could probably assist in that determination.
Do you recommend people get checked out almost no matter what?
Absolutely. 100% of the time, you should go get checked out.
Okay.
You're feeling the pain. You're not, again, a lot of the pain is masked, but urgent care, hospital, gauge your pain levels or your sense of urgency in terms of what you feel is warranted based upon how forcible the collision was. At a base minimal, you should always go to an urgent care. If it's something more significant, certainly a hospital. And it's a twofold purpose. One, you want the medical professionals to let you know that you're okay, right? If you're not a medical professional, you didn't go to school to, diagnose, give a prognosis and do a full evaluation on yourself to see exactly what's wrong with you. So that's the number one reason. The number two reason is it starts to leave a paper trail, written documents, exactly what happened, the accident, where your injuries came from. They can start to make those proper diagnoses. And now there's a correlation from when the accident happened. It's not 2, 3, 4 months later down the line where there's this massive gap in treatment that could cause a plethora of other issues.
You mentioned, obviously adrenaline's flowing and all that stuff. There's also, tempers could flare, emotions could come up in a situation where you get out of the car and you're trying to figure out what just happened. And how do you recommend people handle the communication with the other driver or the witnesses at the scene? Are there things that they shouldn't say or do and things that they should make sure they do?
Yes. Number one, never admit fault. Right. That is certainly more of a legal conclusion.
So don't get out of the car and go, my bad, my bad.
Please do not do that. Right. And sometimes that could be a knee-jerk reaction. And again, you're stressed out and you're panicking. So never admit fault. I like to tell my clients, prospective clients, keep your communication with the at-fault driver to a minimal. There's just not a reason for you to have an extensive conversation with them. You should certainly go and ask for the basic information like your driver's license, proof of insurance, and the registration. And I always recommend getting photographs of that, especially if the police don't come. Sometimes, as I mentioned, they won't come and they're just simply going to tell the parties to exchange information. Okay. The more information you have, the better. All righty. And there's a ton of other reasons why that information is important. You get to see, where they live at. You get to see maybe who all lives with some investigative research, who all lives at that residence. Is there potentially more insurance that may be applicable just other than the one that was in the vehicle? So it really puts us on pace to have a comprehensive picture of what may be out there as we launch our own investigation.
So assuming the police do come, how important is the police report in the claims process?
There's probably nothing outside of the medical documentation more important. Although the police findings are not conclusive, whatever they say is not law, for lack of better words, it does move the needle a lot for us as well as the insurance company to give it a lot of deference. There has been plenty of times where we received a police report, we read the officer's findings, and frankly, we just disagreed with him and thought he was wrong. We prosecute the case. Sometimes it involves filing a lawsuit to get in litigation, and we were able to successfully get that overturned. That happens as well. So it's not conclusive what they say. Sometimes they do an inadequate investigation. Sometimes one of the parties parties go to the hospital, they're transported immediately due to the significance of their injuries, and the officer doesn't have an opportunity to get their statement. So they only have, part of the picture. So these are all real life practical things that are happening in real time and very quickly that could jeopardize the case. So you have a government body, an independent government body coming to do an investigation, issuing their findings and conclusions. That helps a lot the adjuster do their job more fairly and promptly as well. Because if not, that leaves the adjuster to find out what happened really only two ways: contacting their insured, hey, what happened, and contacting our office or getting a statement of facts from our office or the client, what happened. So when you have an officer that's reporting to the scene and, drafting up a formal investigative report, that helps. Those are not admissible in court, but they help, especially for the claims process. And even if you do get in court, you're able to subpoena the officer. And the first thing that officer is going to do is review his record, because it's probably going to be a year or two later. So effectively, the information that's in the report will come out during the testimony, whether in a deposition or in a trial.
In a case where the police don't show up, is there any value in going and filing a police report at your local police station?
There is a lot of value in that. That is a recommendation that we also give to our clients and prospective clients. Unfortunately, it's going to start and end there. But to me, it shows that, look, I really do not feel that I was in the wrong. I went the extra mile to try to get this investigated. And, just based on the Clark County's policies, they don't investigate if it's not at the scene of the accident. So having that document, that's going to be your statement. You're at the police station. I do believe it helps move the needle in terms of a witness's credibility when it comes to proving liability.
You're right. I didn't think about the credibility angle even. Like if you're taking that extra step, you really feel like this is an important thing that you want documented.
Yeah, you feel like an injustice has happened. Who do we call when we feel like something very bad has happened? It's the police, right? Whether it's a violent crime or, somebody violating the law, and that's their job, right? To protect the community, investigate these type of issues, and make sure that they're also holding people accountable on their end of the stick, as well as what we do in the insurance world.
So if you're not able to document the scene, if you're going away in an ambulance and you really can't do anything, any pictures or anything like that, how reliable, is the documentation that the first responders provide?
That's where that information becomes very important. I could tell you, typically, there has been some scenarios where I had a case where the officer does not come to the hospital, but they are supposed to follow up with that party later on to still speak with them. But there's, a conundrum of other issues that pop up. If you sustain a traumatic brain injury, right? Well, now you're giving a statement, but you may be disoriented, confused, and, that may help sway, what your observation was, how you thought the accident happened, maybe if you experienced some short-term memory loss. So things of that nature. So that's why the more people that come to the scene, there's going to be a record left, whether it's the ambulance company, there's going to be a call. We could request, subpoena a lot of this information so we could start putting the pieces to the puzzle together ourselves to, see exactly what happened.
I've heard before to be very cautious when you get that call from the other person's insurance company, because they'll try to trap you or maybe not trap, but they'll try to hold you to say statements that you might say. When you have a client, do you recommend, well, honestly, when they're your client, they have to talk to you, right? The insurance company has to talk to you. But before that, what do you recommend people do as far as how they should talk to the insurance company if they haven't retained counsel?
It's almost like in a criminal case, right? Someone being accused of a crime, you say, I want my lawyer. Right? You say that, but it's kind of a different statement. You say that I am not going to speak with you. I'm in the process of retaining counsel, and they will be the ones to follow up with you. Kevin, what you're referring to is in insurance companies, I think the word trap oftentimes is appropriate.
Okay. All right. I didn't want to trap myself in that, but okay. Yeah. So that is something that they try to do.
It is, and there's been some laws as of recent over the last few years that have been enacted in an effort to try to mitigate the duress or the immediate phone calls of insurance companies and their pressure to try to get victims who've just been wrong, don't know what to do, haven't spoken to anybody about their legal rights, to resolve their case within hours after the case, right after the accident happens. That is very common. Nevada passed a law not too long ago where, if a client has entered into an agreement to resolve their case within 30 days after the collision, and you do not have representation or you do not have counsel, there are some ways that we could rescind or get that agreement undone. It's like starting anew. And the reason that the legislature did that is they noticed an issue, a lot of insurance companies pressuring these victims right after the accident happens.
Right.
Right. And sometimes they would know that these injuries that are being sustained are significant, right? Sometimes fractures, sometimes traumatic brain injuries, and they're trying to compel these victims to enter into these agreements with these settlement releases and waive any and all rights for an exchange. I could tell you for a while, there was a carrier where their magic number was $500. And every time I'm getting a new call and we're doing these consultations from this particular carrier, that was a number all the time, right? So that obviously that was a policy that carrier had instituted, regardless of what factors they're supposed to be looking at in terms of what's the true value of the claim. Right. And that's where attorneys come in at, where they could help assist with those type of issues.
I'm sure there's plenty of people who are like, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to have to go get a lawyer. I'll just handle this. I'll deal with this myself. Tell me why that's a horrible idea.
That is a terrible idea, and why I understand that initial thought, right? We know it's going to be challenges ahead of us. We don't typically run the challenges. We run to the rewards, right? We run to things that are blissful and make us happy. So I understand that knee-jerk reaction, but it is very, very important. I always tell the clients, your medical care comes first and the case comes second, especially for older individuals as well as younger, but you don't know how your body reacted to that accident, especially if this is your first time and your first injury. Your body starts to undergo this chemical response to respond and to repair, and then during that rehabilitation process to make sure your body is strengthening itself the best way possible. Doctors could assist with that, right? The risk factor after you've been involved in one accident, you are much more prone to be injured with less force for future occurrences. It's almost the example that I like to give is I played basketball growing up, and it was like a strained or a sprained ankle. After you sprain that ankle once, I always sprain the exact ankle. And it's obviously because it was a lot more prone to injury.
Yeah.
And that's kind of similar when it comes to injuries, just in general, but, especially auto accidents where you have these, 10, 15, 20,000 pound vehicles striking you. You need to get checked out, and you need to make sure that your body is healing properly as it goes through the different phases of, rehabilitation.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think that's great advice. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to Behind the Neon Lights, Understanding Personal Injury Law in Las Vegas and Beyond with C. Jared Clark. To connect with the team, head to injuryattorneyvegas.com, and please like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. Jared, great having you here. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.